Welcome all to the Report Writing Best Practices for Epic End Programs webinar, the final of our 2020 Epic End free webinar series. My name is Marshall Curry, and I am the Epic End Program Manager, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. I'd like to start by introducing our organization, the Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities Network, or EPIC-N, or the EPIC Network for short, is the nonprofit association of higher education institutions that adopt the award-winning EPIC model to facilitate high-impact, large-scale university, local government, community partnerships. EPIC-N supports autonomous university programs across the globe that connect their local city, their counties, their community groups with the human capital of their university to improve the quality of life for all involved. All of our programming is presented by our member programs, the Ford Foundation, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Thank you to all these groups for their efforts supporting the EPIC network and for supporting this presentation and making it happen. Our presenters today originally planned to present their work at our conference that was planned to be hosted in Indiana this year, but instead are going above and beyond, volunteering their time to make sure this content still is presented virtually to you all and open up to the general public in a free manner, in hopes that we're able to catalyze work to support COVID-19 recovery efforts in any of our communities. Anyone can review recordings of these webinars once they're published and posted to the 2020 EPIC-N webinar series schedule page on the EPIC-N website. And there's 2 events remaining. You can find details on the conference schedule page. These events are not so much webinars, more gatherings of EPIC-N programs, and those are wanting to learn more or support programs. I do suggest you check those out. Before our speakers begin, I want to set the stage for you about what we're going to be talking about today. All of our EPIC-N programs use the EPIC model to complete partnerships, but they all do so in an autonomous manner with some local adaptation. Each university is different, each community is different. They adapt for that. The model states that university community partners must mutually agree upon a set of deliverables for the local government or community partner that the university will provide. Many of our programs use a report to complete this function. And I put report in like quotation marks. Today, we have assembled 3 leaders from the network who will present 3 levels of organizational touch used to complete these final reports. The presenters hope participants will be able to use the 3 different levels presented to find a style that works best for their own local context. We'll hear from our first program providing the lightest touch, and then move to the middle, and then the heaviest touch on these final reports with our final presenter. Please note that there is a level of work that all of our programs are completing to ensure partners receive quality deliverables, and you'll hear about that too as we get into it. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Gavin Luter. He is the Managing Director of the University Alliance at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, their EPIC program. Most recently, Gavin served as the Executive Director of Wisconsin Campus Compact, where he worked with 32 colleges and universities across Wisconsin to advance community-based learning and community engagement on those campuses. Gavin's favorite part of the EPIC network is the listserv that we use. He's able to use it to get quick answers from other network members. With that, I will shift over to introducing something about his program, and I'll actually let Gavin take it from here to talk about his program. This slide we've put together for all of our webinars to allow EPIC programs to showcase a little bit their positionality in relation to one another. So each of our following presenters will also share about these statistics regarding their program before they get into the content of the presentation. So Gavin, I'll let you go through this slide and then jump into your part of the presentation.
Great, thanks Marshall. Thanks everybody for joining. As you all can see here, if you want to learn a little bit more about our program, you can definitely go to our website. If you look up universicity.wisc.edu, you can find out more about us. But we think of our partnership as a 3-year engagement, which is a little different from some of our fellow network members. We spend about a year getting to know the client, matching the project, doing a lot of scoping. And then we spend a year actually creating the deliverables, and then we spend a year helping community partners think about implementation and how to take the next steps. We typically do about 25 projects per year, but last year we did 50 projects for Greene County. So it really depends on what the partners want and how many projects we can match. We have about 2 staff members full-time. I'm 100% full-time, then we have an 80% person, and then we have a couple of people who help us with some admin functions. I'm going to talk a lot more about the final deliverables, but just so you all know about our revenue makeup, it's a really diverse group of sources. We have alumni who support us. We have private philanthropies who have given us discretionary funds. We've applied for some grants and gotten them internally as well as externally. And we also do charge programs a fee somewhere between $20,000 to $30,000 per thematic area that we work on. And we guarantee we match at least 5 projects per thematic area. So that's a little bit about our program. If you want to go to the next slide, Marshall. Okay, this really kicks off our report writing practices. I'm not going to go way too deep on what we do, because we do actually we don't do as much in terms of altering the final reports. But I'll give you a little bit of background. We spend more time, and we had a pretty in-depth conversation. We spend more time on the front end. This is why we spend an entire year getting to know partners and projects and making sure that we connect the scoping and articulating the deliverables and report writing early on in the process. So we're having that conversation a year before the project actually starts. So we have everybody fill out project description forms. We do kind of a strategic doing appreciative inquiry deep dive. And if you want to learn more about that process, I did a separate webinar as part of this online learning series. And I would say that is how we come up with the best reports, is that we spend a lot more time on the front end to dig in. I want to make sure that it's very clear that not community partners, and this goes to one of the questions that was brought up in the chat box, community partners don't always want a report, quite frankly, because sometimes their local officials won't read it, or sometimes their need just doesn't fit nicely into a report. Sometimes they just need a spreadsheet with a bunch of data compiled. Sometimes they need a new website created. So we haven't always found it that we need to create an actual report. We just had a mobile app development class take on a project. And I tell you what the client wanted. They wanted the link to download the app. They didn't care about a report. They just wanted us to turn over the app to them. We do offer a general framework through a faculty cohort where we articulate to faculty members about what a final report or deliverable should be, but really we are scoping those individual projects and deliverables out with the faculty and the community partners early on, so that the partners know that they can kind of push back on us and tell us what would work well. Because if left to our own devices, our students are just going to write papers or give them policy recommendations, but that might not be exactly what they need. Instead, they might want a podcast. They might want a presentation, as I've already articulated. So if you go to the next slide, Marshall, I'm going to show you the result of about 1.5 years of discussions that we had, and we kind of boiled it down to a 6-step process. The step 1 and step 2 are the kind of detailed discussions that we have around scoping, general ideas, and then detailed scoping. This is actually one of our board members went on to be a mayor later, and she said, if you don't spend at least 3 to 4 months scoping out exactly what the partner wants and what they want to use that deliverable for, then you can't even talk about report quality, because you don't exactly know what they want from it. Of course, we do some basic monitoring. We allow faculty members to tap into us if they're having a hard time with writing something. But with this step 4, once faculty turn over the reports to us, we have a couple of different scenarios that we can run through. And I put the 4, the dollar sign thing here, almost like a throwback to like Google, how you look at restaurants and how expensive things are. If there is a report that is completely majorly flawed and it's just terrible and it does not meet our standards, we may have to go to a faculty member with more expertise, or somebody who's a staff member who has more expertise, and pay them, literally buy out their time. We have not made the decision to do this because luckily none of our reports have been that embarrassing or just didn't meet the expectations. But we floated the idea of doing that for one of the reports. And it turns out that price tag, the amount that you'd actually have to pay a faculty member to buy out their time, it's just cost prohibitive. It'd be somewhere around $10,000, and we just weren't able to do that. Scenario 2, we have done before, where we recruit a graduate student who is in that area of expertise. We might pay them $1,000 or $2,000 to help, improve the report. But more realistically, we find ourselves in scenario 3 or 4. Existing partners from around campus offering up some help of grad students if they're a content area expert in that, or just us doing copy editing. There have definitely been reports that we did copy editing for, and we knew that they weren't the strongest. And we just told the community partner, look, that this was just, the students kind of went in a direction that you may or may not find that you appreciate. And so we kind of broker the discussion going from there. But even if the report doesn't officially meet their expectations, what we often hear is that it was still helpful for them to go through that process. And so when we're doing 25 to 30 projects per year, if 1 or 2 of them are really off, they don't get too upset about that. They said, it's a very good exercise for us. Then we officially submit, and then we follow up after the experience. So Marshall, if you could go to the next slide, I'll just quickly mention that at the end of the engagement, we do a summary booklet, which is almost like an end of the year report, where we do little summaries of each report. We thank everybody in the community, and then we actually just started to include what we call an implementation guide. So this is kind of a nice shiny brochure that people can take to their communities and say, this is what we just paid for, this is what we got for it. And now we actually have a framework that helps us think about taking the next step. So I would say if there's something that we really invest a lot of time into, it is this summary booklet with the graphic design, and summarizing and boiling down the most important points. And then we actually use that as a framework to do implementation workshops for the next year. This is kind of the year 1 scoping, year 2, the deliverables happen, in year 3 is where we actually dive into the implementation. So we do these workshops and we walk through this workbook. And then we can use that actually as a basis for fundraising asks later on for specific projects that need some extra financial help to go to the next level. So that's what I wanted to share about our report writing process, a little bit lighter touch, but we invest time in other areas. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Marshall.
Thanks, Gavin. Really appreciate it. Kristofer Patron-Soberano, sorry, Kristofer, is let me open my notes. Sorry, everyone. I'll move us on to our next speaker. Kristofer Patron-Soberano is the programs manager for SDSU's Center for Regional Sustainability and the program administrator for the SAGE project. He is an economist from the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, Mexico, but turned green by completing his master's degree in environmental management at El Colegio de la Frontera Norte, or El COLEF, in Tijuana. Kristofer's favorite part of the network is the camaraderie amongst the members. He runs the SAGE project, which started in 2013, and I'll hand it over to Kristofer to talk more about the general description of his project and also his insight about report writing.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very happy to be here telling you about my experience with the report writing. We are the Center of Regional Sustainability at San Diego State University, and my program is the SAGE project. The way we handle the report writing process, I like to see it as a life hack, because the main point of it is that I don't spend too much time reviewing and managing the students, because we typically have about any number from 7 to 15 students per semester doing report writing, and that would take a lot of time. So we have one very special person that we assign as our chief editor for the report writing process, and that person is the one that manages all the student report writers for that process. Our university established the SAGE program since the year 2013, and we have one major partner per year usually, and sometimes that overlaps with a couple of projects or classes that we're still doing with the former partner. So I would like to say or think that we have a partner and a half, maybe two partners a year. And we also vary a lot with the number of classes that we include yearly. The lowest we've had, it's been, I think, about 10, and the highest about 37. So 25 is a good average number for the number of classes that we have. And we have me as a full-time person, and then our programs director about half the time, 0.5 full-time, and then I'm adding one more full-time for our chief editor for the report writing, and that includes also some interns that we use, because we do have a graphic designer that's very essential to this process, report writing process, as a part-time person in our program. Next slide, please. And this is how it works. We do try to get one class report writer for every one of the classes. Sometimes the classes are very special, like our civil engineering classes. They always actually give us a full report that is full of information and full of graphs and full of images, and it can be up to 250 pages. And we really don't want to touch that. That's very complex, and that's very specific, very professional, and the writing, the spelling, everything is very professional most of the time with our civil engineering classes. And we also have a very special case with the graphic design classes. They regularly do branding for us and logos and whatnot. And those reports, they don't have that much text, so we just present that as the PDFs or of their designs. And that what we do with those special reports or special deliverables is we just add a front page with a standard of our logos and information for classes and student and whatnot. So at the beginning of the process, we get one report writer from each class that's a student that worked specifically on the project. So that person, that student is very knowledgeable about everything that went on with the project. So when he's reviewing and putting together all the information from all his classmates, that person knows what they're talking about. So he's got the proper knowledge to pinpoint any correction or anything. And so if we end up with 7 or 10, 15 report writers, all of them are managed, their time and the coordination for the work is managed by our program chief editor. And we have been so lucky to have this person involved with the program since, I think, 2015, Philip Cumbitz, and he is in the speech, language, and hearing department of the UniverCity. So his writing, reading, and communication skills are just top notch, and he has all the experience possible in the SAGE project already, so he knows what he's doing, and he has created numerous guidelines and documents to guide the report writing students through the process, and he's just a blessing. He's doing his postgraduate degree, his graduate degree now, and I think he's going to be with us still for 1 more year. I don't know what we're going to do when he leaves, but I'm sure there'll be other students with his quality in the university that we can find. So that's like the main piece of this different process for the report writing. So the chief editor provides a workshop at the beginning of the process for all the student writers, and he provides guidelines, he manages schedules and the advancement of the work. And at the end, well, I'm right in the middle between Gavin and Stephen in how much we put into the process for the report writing, because we try not to touch content that much. Most of the information and content that comes from or reports from our classes is pretty good. I don't think I've ever had the case where we thought it was a pretty bad product that we couldn't deliver. Just minor, very, very minor content edits, and our chief editor, what he guides the student report writers through the process with is, little corrections and formatting and just making everything professional looking, and that they have a very similar format. So it looks like all our reports and all our deliverables come from us, and that they have a standard of look and feel, which is to us is very important, to our community partners. It's been kind of a big deal, because they feel like they receive a set and a professional looking variety of projects, but they all come from this program. And at the end, when all the editing process with the report writing students is done, they all go to a graphic designer, and our graphic designer makes it look like that, and he makes sure that all the images and quality in the report is very standard and very high quality. But the benefits that I find from this Epic End Life hack, which is using that chief editor, is that there's a lot of flexibility. He knows what all the different reports that we typically in our program produce, and so he knows, and he has formats for all of them. So it's very flexible. We can incorporate any type of deliverable. Even with databases, we might have just a whole bunch of data in a hard drive or in a CD, but they know how to put the name of the program on the CD or the database or the front page, and our databases are usually accompanied by a booklet with methodology information like that, which is gives it a very professional look as well. Faculty members that were teaching the class are involved as necessary. Some like to be very involved, some don't like to be that that much involved. They just think or believe that the quality of the report and product of the class is good enough, so they are kind of hands off and leave it all to us. And me as a program manager, I don't spend that much time doing that. I'm lucky enough to have a person that I really trust, our chief editor, and I do a final review, make sure that all the information on the cover and throughout the document is accurate, and that's all I do. And of course, administrative stuff of hiring the students, the student writers from each class. Another benefit that I see from this is that students that become report writers are very, very involved with the process, and they really get to know what the SAGE project is all about. And they are speakers and promoters of a program throughout the university. And usually they feel very proud to participate. And all our reports are published. They're on our repository and our library. They're all public. And that's it. And I think I can share with all of you, I'll add these resources, like the formats that our chief editor uses later on, if you're interested in taking a look and what that looks like. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristofer. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the links that, if you're able to share them, that'd be great for our participants. I'll introduce our next speaker. Steve Russell is the program manager of the Project Cities at Arizona State University, which is another Epic End program. Russell holds a master's degree in public administration and a bachelor's degree in sociology and interdisciplinary studies, also from Arizona State University. You can tell he's repping his alma mater today with his outfit, and his most recent professional roles include directing the local food program at the nation's largest coalition of local businesses, Local First Arizona. Steve's favorite part of the Epic Network is getting to see Zoltan, who is my 6-year-old son, on Zoom calls. Thank you for sharing that personal reason why you like the Epic Network, Steve. I appreciate it. And with that, I'll hand it over to Steve to talk about his Epic program and his report writing process.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Marshall. It's a very cute baby. As you said, I'm Steve. I run the ASU Project Cities program. That's our Epic program here at Arizona State. We are a small but mighty team, and we're growing in scope. I wanted to note on this slide that the funding model is very approximate. We actually have been working on transitioning to a fully fee-for-service model, which with hindsight, we could have better planned for contingencies like COVID, because due to COVID, we're going to have to get a little bit more creative, and this model may change. And we're currently seeking additional grant funding. We'll begin courting alumni and foundations to support the program. So, and I think the fee-for-service model is important to bring up here because to me, it kind of necessitates the need for a like a higher quality product, right? And so I'll be talking about the high touch model, and it's kind of something that we do to justify those fees that we're charging our partners. I should also mention here on the staff numbers, that's myself and about half of my supervisor's time. But we also have a team of about 2 to 3 student workers plus additional contract students for individual reports that are not included in this figure. I think I have screen control. There we go. As I said, I'll be doing the high touch model. I should preface that just participating in the planning for this has been a learning experience. We didn't originally frame the workshop this way, but it became clear that we had 3 really beautifully different models that followed neatly along that continuum of staff time. So at any rate, welcome to the high touch model, or as I call it, high investment, high reward, right? So our kind of big picture goal is we're looking to make something that is brief and actually, sorry, just make sure. Something that is brief, actionable, and that is high level. We are, for the big picture, kind of focusing on reporting on the academic experience and the classroom experience that our students went through. So with that, the academic source material that we use for our class summaries is that student work. For that reason, we have to, very clearly state, this is not fact checked, not peer reviewed. Lots of disclaimers that the content is marginally vetted and should seek additional guidance before any sort of implementation, but otherwise we're trying to make something that is very actionable. We are seeking to appeal to multiple audiences, and you need to kind of incorporate different styles to appeal to those different groups, right? So we're appealing to people both at the management level or frontline level who might get really in the weeds and want to read in on that detail. But we also need to appeal to decision makers, i.e. council, who are people running on what I call busy people time, people who just frankly won't read the report at all. So with that, we use a lot of elements of design, such as keeping it nice and colorful, representing as much of the information in terms of graphics and tables and snippets of information, using student photos from throughout the semester to just kind of keep it interesting and make it easy to read. But this also needs to serve what I call academia light, because again, this isn't peer-reviewed content, but for a lot of our students, it's the first time that they've been published in something. And so we like to maintain that feel of prestige, I guess, with it, giving students that opportunity to cite it on their resumes or CVs. So there are several people involved touching each report. There's, of course, the students from the class themselves, folks who do that original student work, and we will, if I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but we will hire a student out of the class if we can to write the class summary section. But otherwise, if we get like 7 different topics from a class, we need someone on our team to kind of write that information out and summarize it. But in addition to the writers and obviously the designers who put it all together, we have a number of reviewers. So for any given report, we may have up to like 11 or 12 people reviewing it. That's the 4 people on our team. The city staff, sometimes 1, 2, we've even had 3 on one of our reports, 1 or 2 faculty members and or a student, if it is like a capstone student, for example. We have in the past also tapped additional editors from within our Global Institute of Sustainability Network, copy editors, etc. So when you add in our comms team, that's anywhere from 6 to 11 people per report. Clearly that is a lot to manage. So we need to really effectively use technology to accomplish this. I will absolutely rave up and down about this software called Teamwork, which we use as a task manager. I find it to be highly effective in just keeping us on task and just kind of taking some of the brain work out of remembering like, okay, what's our next step? It's just right there for us. And I don't have the time to really delve into that here today, but if anyone has questions about that software, feel free to connect with me one-on-one. I'd be happy to run through how we use it. But we're also using it for some cool analysis of our process itself. For instance, I've had my team been tracking their time on individual tasks that are part of our process. And I'm going to be using that information to identify pinch points and just kind of smooth out the process. But now, don't get me wrong, we do produce some really awesome reports. They're a nice final physical deliverable that's more tangible than just giving them a folder full of student papers. But my goodness, they are some hard work. They're very labor intensive. And as I said, I'm working on collecting the data, but I can tell, you know, from our past reports, it's like over 100 hours. We've gone up to a couple hundred hours on some reports. In total, that's all in counting all of the people who touch it and a lot of estimating there, but it definitely takes longer than we think it's going to take every single time. I also have to note that this has kind of been brought up before, but the nature of student work, there are quality issues. And so sometimes some reports are more labor intensive than others. If the quality of the student work really just isn't there. Or also, you know, we're constantly cycling staff because we're staffed by student workers. And the learning curve on this stuff is, it's steeper. So those are a couple of the challenges with working with students. I also want to mention a cascade delay effect because if you know, one task at the beginning gets set off, and one of the really common places we see that is in the review process itself. So if we have, you know, 10 different reviewers, if each of them just takes one additional day, that's 2 whole business weeks right there. And in reality, most of the reviewers do run behind schedule, and in reality, it's not just one day at a time. The big culprits, myself, and our faculty, but that just tends to set everything behind. And I should mention too, there are additional points where we will tend to run behind, but it just has this cascade effect where we feel like we're then starting to play catch up again. So we have high expectations. We've kind of trained our partners to expect a lot from these final reports. And it's, you know, it's again, we're trying to deliver a high level of service with them. We do provide the student content to the city as soon as the semester is over. But we found that we just don't have the capacity to really edit that content. So we kind of present it like, hey, here's this you can get started with and tap into that process you just went through. But as far as your final deliverable, that's going to be coming. And timeline, obviously, there are some issues there because this can set us behind. And it can impact funding deadlines too. Yeah, I guess that's all I want to say on that. So I'll move along to our process, and just here on the top left is a screenshot of our teamwork board, just to kind of give you an example of how we use it. So what you see here are all the cards or different class summaries or course shells, and just the various stages of review that they're in. So it gives us a nice visual of our project health, and we can put notes on the cards, move them around as needed. It's a pretty cool system. But again, don't have time for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the parts of the process itself. So first of all, this is all me, collecting that content from the faculty and just kind of getting it organized and all in the same place. Recruiting a student from the class if possible and if needed. Again, if the content is good enough quality, we don't really need to recruit someone. We'll use that body text, but you know, if we have multiple groups, multiple papers, we need someone to help us write that. So recruiting students from the class, assigning roles, and then I have some template task structures for teamwork. The bigger picture is I'm trying to make everything very streamlined and standardized and kind of, I don't want to say cookie cutter because that has a negative connotation, but consistent. But yeah, after we get it all set up, obviously we got to draft that content. So again, if the student content is good enough to stand on its own, Fantastic. That is the summary section. And then, so the text body, sorry, I should clarify, we have a shell, and then we have the summary section itself, which is for each class, capstone, etc. But once we get that text body done, iteratively edit it with all of the different stakeholders who want to be a part of that, finalize that text, and then we move on to the shell, and that is the kind of intro content, the information about the community, boilerplate profiles, etc. We like to put a nice letter from the mayor and city manager in there, is always a nice touch. But then we will draft an executive summary. And again, we're thinking about the people who just frankly won't really read past a couple pages anyways. So making it nice and brief. And then we lay out the key recommendations from each section into one table there. So again, kind of like a quick reference guide, you can flip into it and just look for the info you need. But yeah, obviously after that, we will design that report. We do a full mock-up. We use InDesign for the design process. And we will regenerate a lot of the content just because brand standards, I know Kristofer mentioned this for SDSU, ASU is really big on brand standards. And we have, well, brand standards, we have to do it. And so they look great. I guess that's all I'll say on that. Let me move on. The last step, obviously, once we get it all designed, we've reviewed that design, we'll send it off to order a limited run of print copies. I don't like to waste paper, so we do some outreach ahead of time to figure out like exactly how many we're gonna need for each of our stakeholders. We'll order about 10 extra, but that's about it. Everyone else will direct them to the digital, which by the way, I'll post a link to our website. All of our reports are online. And then we'll obviously distribute the physical copies. And something we really like to do whenever we can't always pull this off. But if say we've got kind of like a group of them that have kind of all come out at the same time, or if we're finishing out a semester's worth of reports, we like to schedule a visit to council if we can, and present some of that content there. It's a great opportunity to bring students along, give them real world exposure to what that environment looks like, and you know, also kind of get our work on the record. All of our content is public, so it is publicly available content, free obviously, and on our website, but it's really meaningful, I think, for the students to get involved in that part. All right, so with that, it's on to our reports. I'm going to show you kind of how they've changed over time because they have evolved a lot. And I would say that we're finally at that point where we have a solid working template. We've got consistent formatting. We've answered most of the how do you handle this questions that we'll run into. And we're getting to the point where we're starting to pump them out a lot more quickly. So with that, here is where we started in 2017. This is our first round of reports. All the same color, which in my opinion is just a little boring. But each report included all of the student work, all of it, reports, data, everything, PowerPoint slides. You know, the problem with that is we'd come in to see our city partners and drop this giant stack of textbooks on their desk, and it's hundreds of pages, and our city staff, especially council, would be like, whoa, ain't no way I'm gonna read that, get it off my desk. So we adapted, we changed the structure, we moved it down to a single book, moved all of the student content online, and transitioned over to that one report for the entire semester's worth of work. But the challenge with that then is that they're pretty random topics, and they won't all appeal to a single reader, right? So even though it sounds like it should be a more efficient format, we would actually have to print more books and use more paper and pay a higher cost on printing. We have moved back to the single topic per report format. And one other note before I move on is just that the other problem with this is if like one project falls behind or hits a snag, everything waits, right? But that leads us to where we are today. Here we go, nice narrow. Unfortunately, this is the only one I have with me. Thank you, COVID. But we've got consistent formatting. They're very unique and very diverse topics, right? They're colorful, they're themed, and they're very specific. So I'm not going to give the transit report to someone who works on community engagement. That wouldn't make sense, and they don't want it, and vice versa. Plus, let me say they look really nice stacked next to each other on a shelf. And that's always nice. Great for things like tabling events and onboarding new partners, etc. And so bottom line, it's, they're very highly valued. They're frequently requested. Our partners, other communities, as well as sometimes unexpected stakeholder groups, like some of our work from Apache Junction is informing a homeless coalition in the Verde Valley region. That's east to northern Arizona. And they're also seen as that final deliverable, again, that tangible product. Not a fan of wasting paper, but sometimes it's really nice to have something in someone's hands at the end of it. And if we go present to council and they walk away with this nice report, hopefully they read it, but they've at least got a couple pages of valuable information and next steps. And if it's a topic that really interests them, we're going to get them to read it if they've got that physical copy with them. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we've really designed these to appeal to those multiple audiences. So they are a diverse book, something that our students are pretty proud of participating in. And I guess that's a bit about all I've got from me, but just kind of in summation, today you've seen a variety of different models. Our intent with this was not to place value on one model over another. There are trade-offs to each. And rather what we wanted to do is give you the tools and information to choose what level of investment and return you need for your program, what makes the most sense for you and your projects. I'm a huge fan of our reports, and it provides a tangible final output that's high value to our partners, but it's clearly a drag on operations, and it necessitates managing additional staff and, dare I say, not just herding cats, but also birds, fish, and gerbils. Gavin with the UniverCity Alliance at UW-Madison is able to pull off a lot more projects than we are. And I think that's in large part because their program is focused on the front end and the high level outcomes for the community. They let the student work take the front seat and summarize with a nicely designed topic brief. Kristofer, the SAGE project at SDSU, is somewhere in the middle, right? In terms of time invested by his team, but also he's found a way to outsource that process, which again enables his staff to focus more on program delivery, let someone else get in the weeds on those content-wise, and that's also a really nice employment opportunity, gotta say. So I guess that's my thoughts in summation. With that, I will turn it back over to Marshall. And Marshall is muted.
Thank you. I'm back. I had to wait for, anyway, I'm here. Thank you so much to our speakers. If you could all of our participants on the chat, if you could give our participants a round of applause, either unmute your microphone or use the reaction button on Zoom. I think they did a fabulous job of giving us different best practices for EPIC programs to write reports. Yes, thank you, thank you. I'm so glad y'all are here. And we're able to see and thank you for your presentations, every presenters. Please, you can learn more about these presenters and the EPIC Network on our website and also on our news page under the People of the EPIC Network pages. They've got nice profiles about each of our presenters there and also about our sessions as they've been published. To continue the discussion, please do give us feedback on the presentation. I'll put the feedback link into the chat box here shortly as we get into the Q&A. In your thanks, send a social media message thanking our speakers. Use the hashtag 2020EPICN, and you'll more logistics about continuing this discussion. You'll be emailed a link to view the recording of the session once it's published, and you can view more again at our website. All of our presentations, I challenge our presenters to share resources. I've been able to capture some of them, and I'll be putting up more thanks to Steve and Kristofer putting information in the chat box. I'll pull those links and make them available in this slide deck, so for attendees can view them in the future. And with that, thank you for joining the Report Writing Best Practices. We're going to start Q&A in just a second, but this is, again, the end of the 2020 EPIC free webinar series webinar functions. We have a couple of events coming up, but let's hand it back to our speakers for some Q&A. We're going to go ahead and start with some of the questions that were in the chat, I think got answered already. So I'm going to move us into 3 questions that we were asked by RSVPs, and I'll ask, and then audience, feel free to unmute and ask follow-up questions as we get going. So I'm going to so I'll start with the first one. What level of detail or investment, this is a question for Kristofer, Gavin, and Stephen, what level of investment or detail is needed for the report to make it appropriate?
Yeah, I'll start because I really, when I was listening to Chris and Steve present, I think like, gosh, every time I listen to them, I always think like, gosh, I could be doing this a little bit differently about my program. So I just really appreciate that. Yeah, Marshall, I'll start by saying about the level of detail that is appropriate. I mean, there's no really good, clear answer. It really depends on having that conversation with the community partner. I think we've definitely encouraged people to have executive summaries to make sure that there's some kind of summary so that people don't get too overwhelmed with details. But you know, some of our civil and environmental engineering projects, they have like full, like basically all the design building code stuff that is literally like 200 pages long. And, you know, at first we thought about, gosh, you know, we need to get that out. But at the same time, if they then choose to use that to go to a consultant to try to bring that idea to scale, then they might want that level of detail. So we really, you know, if we hear from the community partner, this is just too much detail, then, you know, we'll of course try to edit it. But we, I don't know, I think this is just a matter of good scoping and listening to what level of detail you think that they want. I will also say just a little addendum. There are some times that reports cover very sensitive things in the community that the community partner does not always want to get out to a larger group. One of ours, for instance, was looking at the placement of a business park, you know, an industrial park. And in order to do that, they would have to buy land and like that land was owned by somebody that they had not been consulted with yet. They didn't even know that they were looking at the land, and they did not want the community to think, oh, we're looking at buying this land. It's like, no. These were just student recommendations of where to put it. So I think some of those details can get kind of sensitive for community partners, and it's always important to check with them to say, hey, does this reveal anything? And that's what we do as part of our light editing process. If there's anything that they get through that, then they flag it for us. It's not a perfect answer, but it's kind of what I got.
Kristofer, do you have anything you want to add or suggest on that front? And then Steve?
You know, I agree with Gavin, and basically it all depends on the type of the project it is and type of information that has been produced.
Yeah, and I'll second a lot of that too. It is very project dependent, and Gavin hit on politics. We have just dealt with that for the first time, really, where there were some students that got out ahead of policymakers, and you know, the department leadership was a little concerned about it, or they phrased things in such a way that was like really critical of some programming. And that's about communicating with the community and seeing what they're comfortable with. The only thing that I'll add to that is just our approach is driven by the student work, yes, but I think also just making sure that we have different links, different versions of links. That's why we'll have an executive summary and a more detailed summary, so we can kind of let people choose their own adventure. So I think that it is important to have some really concise summary information that's very brief, no more than a few pages. But you know, we also didn't want to lose out on the details that the students were presenting. So project dependent.
Thanks. And as I share my screen to get us to the next question, I just want to kind of remind everyone about the EPIC model that we haven't shared about, we've shared about in other presentations, is that it really depends on what you agree upon with your community partner, and that's a really good place to start. And that's where the scoping process that Gavin brought up in his presentation, and that all the other two programs are using to some degree, like, is so crucial, is because you'll decide in that scoping process what level of investment and detail is appropriate for that project. So I just want to echo what's already been said and just give the EPIC-N perspective there. So the next question is, what audience level do you think you should write your report for? And again, I think some of you already touched this a little bit, so if one of you want to take this one really briefly, and we'll move to the next one.
I'll just say, well, the priority first is your client, your partner. So what your partner wants and prioritizes, is that what you should prioritize. Not to say that all the information that could be, valuable for the community in general should be accessible for anyone that wants to access it. So report summaries and condensed information like that should be clear and upfront on reports and on deliverables, so other, a wider audience can access it and read and understand it.
Yeah, I think that's basically what I would say. The only other thing that I would add is that our summary booklet, we write that for a very general audience. We don't write that for policymakers. We write that at a very, very basic level, so that it can be shared with anybody. Frankly, it could be shared with a funder, it could be shared with city council, it could be shared with the community at large. But yeah, I think the deliverable or the report that you're actually doing, you need to be writing that for your particular client, whoever the point of contact is or the project lead. So Chris is right on with that, I think.
Great, thank you both.
I actually do have something to briefly add on that. Is we aim for like an 8th to 12th grade reading level on the executive summary section. The class summaries can get a lot more detailed. For instance, with our report on above ground storage tanks, highly technical, and there was no way you were going to write that for a general audience, but we did write an executive summary about the problem itself.
Great. Yeah, that executive summary feature, I think, is really important to think about, even if it's just a couple sentences describing the project. But let's move on to the next question, then we'll open it up to our attendees to ask questions. And again, just one of you answer this one if we can. What feedback do community partners give for what they want to see in reports? Big question, maybe.
I think that's the scoping process. I would just lean on that for my answer. I don't think it's more complicated than just asking them, like, what do you want? And that's where they can say, we just want a presentation, we don't want a report, or we want a website, or whatever it is. That's all part of the scoping process. And it's interesting though. Like, there are definitely some times where, like, one of our reports was around creating an art collaborative among 9 different art space organizations in a particular city. They wanted that report specifically written for their board. So it was really important for us to know, like, this is a board that's going to have to then go out and sell it versus city council. So again, I mean, that's part of the scoping process. We learned that, but it would have been a tragic mistake that if we did not hear them say, this is something that we need to give to our board so that they can then go out and fundraise with this. So yeah, anyway, that's a pretty simple answer for me, actually.
Great. Well, thank you for your answers, everybody, and to those questions. Now let's open it up to the audience members who are on the call. We still have some time available for questions. So if you have a question, either raise your hand in the participant menu, or just go ahead and unmute and ask your question. I'll kind of moderate. I did see we had a question come through from Terry asking Steve if he could share the disclaimer about student work not being peer reviewed. It looks like he put that in the chat box, but thank you for doing that. I'll point everyone's attention there while we wait for someone to unmute and ask a question, if anyone has any questions.
Well, if no one's going to throw it in, I know there was one from the chat earlier about using graphics. I can speak to that briefly. It's just generally yes. We always tell our students anything that you can represent graphically, please do. But it is very important to get the original data set. Because if you just get a screenshot of someone's graph on Excel, there's not a lot you can do with that. And since we have to put everything into ASU brand standards, also, we need that original data. So get as many graphics as you can is my recommendation. I provide a link for students to upload graphics, photos that they take on site, things like that. And we will use those in the report.
And I was just going to say, I saw Anne ask another question. Sorry, Chris, if you were going to add on to that.
No, I was going to say the exact same thing.
Yeah. Simplifying the process. I mean, I will say that we have tried to simplify our process as much as humanly possible. I don't know that there would be much that I would remove or simplify for our process. I do think that the scoping does take a long time. And so therefore, like, it can sometimes feel like we're talking so much about the project and it's like, all right, get on with it, already. So I think we could probably shorten the amount of time that we spend on that. But again, it just takes us, I mean, I don't know what my colleagues are doing, but it takes us so long to match projects with particular faculty members. Like, we start matching in January and I'm still not done matching projects for next year. I don't know how people do it in a shorter window. But anyway, it just takes us so long that we need to have that time. But anyway, Anne, that's the best I got for your question. Sorry, it's not a great one.
I'll say part of my actions or activities with this process is consulting the faculty members that taught the class involved with the project to recommend a student that can be a report writer. And sometimes that, takes some back and forth and insisting and whatnot. And I've found that, it's not very common, but some reports are so good and the information that students have produced are almost complete that that specific class might not need a report writer. It would take a level of analysis from myself to check it, all the information, say, okay, all this information can just be put together and put a front page on it and be done with it. And so this class needs not a report writer to be hired for that. That might save just a little time, but at the same time, I also think, it's a great opportunity for a single student from the class to get a little extra money and to be a SAGE project, defender and promoter. So that's why I tend not to, think to take that opportunity to reduce the number of student hires we do, but that would save time. Basically just, make sure that we don't need all those report writers sometimes.
Yeah. And I can add to this that what I focused on first was the reviewing process. We used to have a reviewer, and then we would reconcile the reviews. The next reviewer reconcile the reviews down the line, and that takes a lot of time. So I've now got the students just doing reconciliation about every second or third reviewer. And there was some concern of like passing on an unreviewed piece of work to the city. And so we've always kind of made sure that we have like a final almost version of the text ready for them. But we recently just had a discussion with the community partner about it, and they indicated that they were comfortable with reviewing it in a draft format. So we're able to get everyone onto like one Google Doc to do it. Google Docs also is another huge time saver. We do find, unfortunately, for whatever reason, some people are really uncomfortable with the platform. And for those people, we need to go Microsoft Word, but Google Docs, getting multiple people reviewing at the same time is a big time saver. And also, I guess in total, by kind of cutting down the reconciliation and combining the reviews, we were able to reduce the number of tasks by roughly a third. And that's significant. I think the next place I'm going to be focusing on is that kind of front end part, either getting the classes to consolidate their work into one report through maybe like an honors contract, or if they have like one graduate student in the class, making that their task, or groups or whatever. Or what we've also discussed, hiring students from the class.
Thank you all. Any other questions from the audience? Unmute, say your question or your farewells, and your thanks for our speakers. Appreciate everyone joining us for this webinar. I think I'm going to do my brief outro. This has been the report writing best practices for EPIC-N programs as a part of the 2020 EPIC-N free webinar series with Gavin Luter, Kristofer Patron-Soberano, and Steve Russell. I will see you all next time, and I'll stop the recording now.